bit later. I'll just want to thank everyone for attending this monthly webinar series. We're focused on the local, state, and national policies that affect Maryland's forests and the people that rely on them. So you can view this and other recordings of our previous webinars and sign up to be notified of future installments at the Foundation website. That's marylandforestryfoundation.org, and click on webinars. Ordinarily, today we would be joined by Maryland Forestry Foundation President Gary Allen. He will not be hosting today, but you will be able to see him at next month's session. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Foundation website in the coming weeks. If you have questions for Dan as he's speaking, please enter those in the Q&A section in your Zoom window. You can generally find that at the bottom of your screen, and we will address as many of those questions as we have time for at the end of our session. This month, we are very excited to be joined by Dan Coy of the Maryland Department of Natural Resources Forest Service to learn more about recent updates to Maryland's Forest Conservation Act. It's one of our most significant pieces of legislation that shape environmental practices regarding development in the state of Maryland. So a very important discussion, and we're very pleased to be able to present this information. Dan Coy has over 13 years of experience in urban forestry, dedicated to transforming urban landscapes and advancing environmental justice. As the urban and community forest sorry, my text got scrambled. His work focuses on promoting environmental justice in historically underserved communities, pioneering urban wood utilization programs, and ensuring the growth and vitality of urban forests. Dan's professional journey includes spearheading large-scale tree planting efforts, improving forestry processes through lean methodologies, and fostering collaboration among diverse stakeholders to ensure equitable access to green spaces. A graduate of Purdue University and an ISA certified arborist, Dan has successfully enhanced urban forestry programs across multiple cities, driven by a deep commitment to creating sustainable and vibrant communities. His leadership in the field of arboriculture is evidenced by 9 years of experience serving on 2 local ISA boards in various roles. In his free time, Dan enjoys hiking with his wife Erica and dog Mavis. His cat Hessa, on the other hand, hates the outdoors and absolutely refuses to go on hikes, which is rude. So they just hang out in their Baltimore home. When not out enjoying nature with his family, Dan can usually be found in his yard tending to his gardens, both flower and food, or tending to whatever side quest his old house has decided to bestow upon him. Dan spends his vacations visiting family and friends, eating new and hopefully good food, and exploring distant wildernesses. So thank you, Dan. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Megan, for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to begin sharing my presentation, and as I do, I just want to highlight something that was not part of my bio, and that is I'm not a lawyer. So everything that I'm about to say here is not legal advice by any means, and when looking to implement the new FCA changes, if you happen to be involved in that with local programs, or just wanting to know nitty-gritty legal details about it, please contact somebody who is a lawyer. I'm just the guy that needs to figure all these changes out. So in that vein, I have put together today a presentation that is, by and large, in kind of plain speak. I'm trying to bring all of this legalese to people in a digestible way. So the concepts behind this change and the most impactful bits of it can be conveyed easily and understood and repeated to those who maybe were not able to join us today. So welcome to this presentation. I'm going to try to keep this moving along at a healthy clip, as I'm anticipating we're going to get quite a bit of questions, because this is the largest change to a 30-year-old law in its 30 years. So lot to discuss. Specifically, the topics for today are, I'm going to do a brief overview of the bills that brought about these changes, because I know them by a couple of their letter and number combinations. You all might be familiar with them with a different one, so I want to make sure that we're all speaking the same language, and I tend to reference these bills when I'm talking these days without even thinking about it. So I don't want to lose anybody. So we won't spend a ton of time on the bills themselves, but I just want to get that out of the way. And then I'll take you through some of our milestones. What are we looking at? What does our roadmap to full implementation look like? And then I'm going to focus the majority of my talk on the impact. So that's where I'll break into the bills themselves, and I'll do that in a chronological order. So we'll tackle the stuff that's already happened and then go, all the way through the future of FCA, and then we should have plenty of time at the end to answer any questions that y'all have dropped in the chat there. So with that, let's begin. So the bills that we're talking about today are SB 526 that was passed in the latter half of 2023. It brought about the majority of the changes to FCA. So this was really the bulk of the work, and I think full disclosure, I wasn't here at that point, and I certainly wasn't part of the legislative process. But I think the intent of that bill was to make all of the changes, and it was going to be a one and done. And they packed a lot into that. And full disclosure, I'm not going to cover everything in that bill in this presentation. There's not enough time for that. So yeah, if you want to, please download that. You can look on the legislative website. Just make sure you're looking for 2023 SB 526. You can pull up the final version and give that a read for yourself. And as the slide says, there's much more to come on that content-wise in this presentation. And then HB 1511, that one passed this previous spring in 2024. By and large, it didn't really change FCA at all. What it did do was adjust the timeline for implementation of that bill, and the steps that each individual organization needs to take to be compliant. In my personal opinion, it was a really good move. I think there was a lot of good work done in SB 526, but I think some of the timing was going to be really rough. That being said, there were some changes that are getting pushed off considerably because of HB 1511 that some of us, myself, just from a personal standpoint, would like to see sooner. So there's good and bad there, but mostly what I'm happy about is it's put us in a position, us being the state, my program, to help our localities implement theirs just by reordering when things have to happen. So like not everybody has to be up to speed all at once. HB 1511 is going to allow us to get our technical manual out, our model ordinance out before our local programs have to be fully compliant. And I think that's setting us up for the best it can to allow us to help our local programs with this heavy lift. And it's a huge lift, and I and my team are happy to help with that in every way that we can. Thankfully, HB 1511 gives us a lot more time to do that. So, and between those two bills, figuring all this out was very confusing. Yeah, it took a lot. I printed out all the documents, all the reference documents. Took me a few days, but I worked through it all, and then I sent it to legal, and they told me what I did wrong. So the changes that we have here are pretty solid, but once again, not legal advice. Just trying to get the points through to you. So that being said, the milestones that we've hit and still need to hit with all of these changes between the two bills are kind of as follows. So like on or before July 1st of last year, I guess just at this point, before, it couldn't be on. So before July 1st, 2024, any approved Forest Conservation Plan, FCP, is going to be addressed under the old FCA. unless there's a material alteration to the LOD. I mean, slight tweaks here and there, you know, planting technique A doesn't get used, but B does, and they're both acceptable. Like, no need to reopen that up. Like, unless you're completely redoing the project, you know, unless it's material alteration of the LOD, like you're fine if you got approved before July 1st. That's all old FCA. None of these new changes apply to your project. On a personal note, I would have liked to see that, you know, in the applications beforehand, because I think that would have been a little cleaner. But once again, I didn't write this. I'm just implementing it, so it's approved, and approved is approved. So, and then on July 1st, 2024, that's when we got the first wave of changes from SB 526 came at us, and I'll talk more in depth about those in later slides. It's not a lot of the changes that went into effect July 1st, 2024. We looked at that pretty hard on my team, and I think everything that came down the pike at us can and is being handled just programmatically. We're able to adapt to that. We don't need to change our regulations or anything, and I don't think that our local programs do either. And then before December 31st of last year, we were due to put out a technical manual update that is out. We have given that to our local programs to go over, and we wanted to get it in their hands first before we distribute it to everybody. It will eventually go up on our website. We just wanted to give them the first look at it because we were certain that they would be receiving questions, because everybody's got a lot of questions with this. So we wanted them to be well versed in the new technical manual before we start distributing that by and large. Other notes on that technical manual are we're releasing this as a digital first model. We really tried to update it, look and feel wise. That's also part of the reason it got pushed pretty late in 2024, really came down to the wire. But I think the end product looks a lot better than the original, or I guess the latest version. Yeah, we really tried to modernize it, bring it into the new age, and I think we succeeded in that. With that, the other side of that coin, I guess, is that we recognize that this is the biggest change in the Forest Conservation Act's history. So there's quite possibly something that's in that manual that we will want to tweak. There's also quite possibly something that's not in that manual that our users of that manual would like to see. So a digital first format is easier to edit, and so we're open to that feedback. If there's, especially if there's something in there that you think is wrong, or just something that isn't in there or isn't talked about enough in there, and you want to see more, we're open to that feedback, and we're happy to reopen that and, you know, do version 4.1 or whatever. And then eventually, after the dust is settled with this, we will be printing copies, because we also recognize that there are a lot of people, myself included, that like a physical copy. Whenever I need to open up that manual, I always pull out the physical copy. Not almost always, even though I have it more readily digitally. So that's probably all I'm going to say about the technical manual for the rest of this presentation. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And then before July 1st of this year, 2025, we are to have our model ordinance out. And this is our example ordinance to our local programs. They don't have to follow it, but they can if they so choose. And they should definitely, in my opinion, now I am biased, take a look at it before updating their ordinances. This is also the ordinance that we use to implement our program. So if you want to know how our program works in depth, check out the model ordinance when it comes out. I'm really hoping to have this at least 95% complete in the next month and a half before planting season hits us. But we'll see. Regardless, we owe this to the world by the end of this fiscal year, July 1st, 2025. And then the big date. But before July 1st, 2026, state and local programs must have their regulations and ordinances updated. We're going to have a lot of work on on the regs on the state side. That's going to come congruently or on the heels of our ordinance update. And I imagine our local programs are going to have the same, but the deadline is before July 1st. So if you weren't aware, you are now. We got some work to do. And once again, my team is happy to help any of our local partners do that. And then July 1st, 2026, it's on. The rest / bulk of the changes are in effect at that time. And then final one, I put this one in just in case we have some folks from our local program on, and that is early 2028. That's going to be when another round of biennial reviews come through for our local programs. And for those of you who may not be as aware about the intricacies of how we interact with our local programs with regards to FCA. So every 2 years, we review the local programs more than just the annual reporting. Like we look into the programs, we make sure that they're in compliance with the spirit of the law as well as the letter of the law. And we really try to have it as a back and forth so they can give us feedback, we can give them feedback, and we can make sure that we're all on the same page. And so just as it happens to be, that's going to be 2 years-ish after all of the laws go into effect. And that's going to be the first time that we at the state level are really looking at our local programs and saying, are they in compliance with new FCA? And I'll have a little more of that later on in the discussion. But of course, throughout that whole time frame in the 3 years up until then, we'll be working with them. We'll be talking with them. We're a resource here. We're not trying to leave everybody out there and then like come and assist later. So there's a little bit of back and forth. I just want to put that on there as like that's when we're actually going to be doing the assessment. So impacts, and for any of you following along visually at home, the remainder of these slides, I'm going to have the dates of these impacts up there at the top next to the word, just so you know, and can reference timeframes. And then the numbers you see there, like the first bullet point has that little, I don't know, squiggly symbol, I don't know what you call that thing, 5-1606. Each of those numbers references the statute at the state level, where if you want to look into this more, if you want more information, if you want the legal language around this, because once again, I tried to make this digestible and not in necessarily legal language. Look up those statutes. You can find them online fairly easily. That's where you'll find the particular information. I'm not going to read through all those numbers unless. Yeah, I'm not going to read through all those numbers. They're on the slides. This will be posted. You can look them up and Google at your leisure. But the first point there is solar photovoltaic facilities are not subject to afforestation requirements. And just as a refresher, these are impacts that took effect July 1st, 2024. So as I speak here in January 25, these are in effect currently. So in the point that I want to drive home with this is that the solar photovoltaic facilities are still subject to reforestation. So if there's clearing involved, there is going to be mitigation required. The reforestation has not gone away for these projects. It is solely the afforestation aspect. This is one we debated internally as to like, do we need a regulatory change on? And we decided no, because at least on our sheet, it's as easy as in that land use category, that percentage calculation, just for afforestation, just put that as 0. And then all the other calculations are the same. So they're just not required to do the afforestation, which logically kind of makes sense. It's hard to farm solar arrays with the shade of a forest. I kind of get that. And then The other big thing I think that has already come out is that um, qualified conservation as a mitigation technique is opened up again. So there was a clause after an attorney general's opinion that any qualified conservation, especially if it was setting up a mitigation bank, needed to be approved before a certain date. That date is no longer there. So it just needs to be approved by the applicable program. So if you're applying at the state level, it needs to be approved by the state, the local level, and then you can use that as a mitigation technique, which I'm hopeful will see a lot more protected forests in our state. There are some caveats to that, and that's what this next bullet point gets into, and that is that qualified conservation can only be used to fulfill half of a project's mitigation needs. So you have a project that needs 15 acres of afforestation or reforestation. You can get 7.5 of those acres, or half, from qualified conservation. So going out there and preserving and enhancing, enhancing is a key component of that, existing forests. And then that other 7.5, you have to go and actually plant trees, right? So you have to do on-site planting, off-site planting, pay into a planted mitigation bank, that sort of thing. Local programs can propose a higher ratio than the 50% up to 60 on like a project by project basis, with justification and all that. Other changes to the afforestation, reforestation, stream buffers, which were already called out, have been further defined. So the minimum stream buffer is 50 feet measured from the stream channel for intermittent, and 100 feet for perennial streams. And I've gotten some feedback since this comes out. It's like, well, how do you measure reasonably from the stream channel? Where do you know where that is? And I'm like, this is a minimum. Just measure it the normal way. You can measure it from the regular bank, and you'll hit the minimum because the channel's beyond the bank. Like, don't make this too complicated. That being said, you want to measure down to the foot from the stream channel. Have fun figuring out how to measure exactly where the stream channel is. If you come up with something good, let me know. And then green infrastructure that is planted above and beyond the environmental article requirement can be granted as full mitigation credits. I don't have a good example for you on that. My team kicked that around a lot. We didn't come up with much, but it is allowable now. So I wanted to put that out there. And once again, if you have good ideas for that, send them our way. I would love to get some examples of that in our technical manual. And then the other big one that I'm really excited about is our priority urban forest map. So there's a lot of really fun legal language around this that I won't bore you with, but we were tasked with identifying forests in urban areas that are the most important to like mitigating heat island effect, increasing or decreasing pollutants in the air, and increasing the health and livability of our urban areas. Is a fun exercise. That's a whole presentation in and of itself, but in a nutshell, we have produced this map, and I put the abbreviated hyperlink there in text. You can type that in. You can check out the map right now. We're pulling from data sources that are live, that are being routinely updated. So our map is going to change over time. We're going to have to version that for our archiving and reference for our projects. But we're not going to have to redo it. So it's going to live out there. Eventually, we are going to host this on our website and make it findable. But once again, we wanted to kind of keep this in-house with ourselves and our local practitioners, so that they have some time to digest this information before fielding a bunch of questions. That being said, I'm happy to take questions on it. I'm happy to talk about this all day, every day, because I think it's just really cool. Is what we've done with it is we've identified the areas where if there is a forest, it's a priority urban forest. And I should say this isn't a comprehensive, these are priority forests map. Like if it's a priority for some other reason that's outside of an urban area, then it's still priority. It's not going to show up on this map. But if it shows up on this map but isn't a forest, well, it's a priority area. So if you want to look for places that don't have trees that would be considered priority, you can use this map. So you can just easily go in there, look. You can overlay with, you know, aerial imagery and say, oh, there's no trees there, but it's in this priority area. If I plant this, it's going to be priority. And I think that's a useful aspect of it that we intentionally put in there. And then obviously, if there's a forest in that area, it's going to be considered priority. So really cool map. Go check it out. There'll be a little bit more on why that's important later on here in the talk. And then, yeah, this next bullet point kind of alludes to that. So mitigation banks and qualified conservation are only allowed in priority retention, afforestation, reforestation areas. So that's kind of what I alluded to there with that map. Is if you're looking to set up a mitigation bank, this map will show you areas where, based just off being a priority urban forest. Now that, again, there's a lot of ways you can be a priority forest, but just off being a priority urban forest, you could establish qualified conservation there, or a planted mitigation bank, and it would count, because this is a new restriction in place. But yeah, so banks and qualified conservation have to be in priority areas. All right, so moving on to the bulk of this, impacts as of July 1st, 2026. So we jumped forward a couple of years, year and a half. So our state policy changes from a no net forest loss to a net forest gain, and we are charged with measuring that every 4 years. And the crowd goes wild. You're all on mute, but I'm going to assume you're all going wild over that, right? Like, we're not losing anymore. We're gaining, and as a forester, that's great. Sadly, not here yet. This is another one that I would have liked to see a little sooner, although that could have also caused some issues. Nonetheless, great change in my opinion. I think that's an awesome policy change. Let's grow our forests. I think it's beyond time to do that. And now we'll get into the legalese portion of this presentation with the following definition changes, which once again will change in July 1st, 2026. So if you don't see these in our new technical manual, you don't see these in our regulations or anything like that, that is intentional, because as we sit today in 2025, these definitions do not apply. But July 1st, 2026, they do. And I have written them here verbatim. I'll read them aloud for those of you who are not reading, just because I think this is important. So forest land means a contiguous patch of trees that is at least 1 acre in size, exhibiting at least one transect of at least 120 feet in width. A tree canopy means the crowns of deciduous and evergreen woody vegetation that is the product of natural growth or human planting and is greater than 3 meters in height. So 2 new definitions coming at us. Do with them as you will, but make sure they apply. Some exemptions have been tweaked. I wrote here, please go read for yourself, because yeah, please go read for yourself. These are just tweaks by and large. There's a lot of nuance in there. It would be a whole nother presentation once again to comb through all of the minor exemption tweaks. So I won't bore you with all that. I'll just hit you with the notes. Some noteworthy shout outs are, orchards have been called out, tree farms have been called out, forest management has been called out. A lot of this stuff, you may be thinking to yourself, well, that's already allowed. In some programs, yes. In some programs, maybe not. But they're called out here specifically. And once again, I wasn't involved, but I think the intent here is to recognize that this operation is over the long term going to have the area in forest even if that forest goes away periodically. Like I think about old apple orchards, you eventually do have to cut those down, but you're going to replant because it's an orchard, right? So if the land use change doesn't change, it's going to stay an orchard, then it's exempt. You don't need to do that. And same with tree farms and forest management. Also, just call it out. I don't think this is going to apply to really anybody but practitioners on this call, but federal government facilities that house or employ, I think that is and or employ 2,500 persons are exempt from FCA. Not sure how that came about or the reasoning behind that, but that's what it is. And I felt that one in particular was kind of new and cut and dry, so worth mentioning here. Also, July 1st, 2026, and all of these next few slides are going to be 2026, so I'm probably going to stop saying that. But multifamily housing, which are 25 or more units, and transit-oriented development that happens in a priority funded area. Sorry, I left funded area out there, but it is specifically in a priority funded area. They have a different reforestation rate than other projects, so that they are reforested at a ratio of a quarter of an acre, 0.25 acres planted for every acre removed, or they're mitigated via preservation at 0.5 acres or half an acre for every acre removed. More on forestation level requirements. So there's no more conservation threshold. That whole calculation has been done away with, and it is a simple 1-to-1 for all the other projects out there. So like it's just 1-to-1 reforestation. You cut down an acre, you got to replant an acre. Simple as that. However, there's a caveat there. So if a forest is located in a priority funding area and not in a priority retention area, and that's a important point there, then the reforestation ratio is half an acre for every acre removed. And I believe the intent there is to recognize that like the priority funding areas are the areas where we're saying and investing. We being the state or local programs or planning departments are saying like this is where we want our development. So I think our legislators recognize that and say, well, they designed the development there. Let's give them a little less on the forestation requirements. And I can't really argue effective against that logic. But I want to highlight that the priority retention areas supersede the priority funding area. So if you're in a priority funding area, but it's also a priority area for retention, then the 1-to-1 ratio applies. So if we've said that, no, this area needs forests, that is the priority for this, that takes precedent over the priority funding. And then also another change that I love seeing here, personally, I think it's great, is after all of the afforestation and reforestation has been planned out on the site, all of the unforested riparian buffers must be afforested or reforested. So even if there wasn't forest along that stream before, you got to plant it. If you cut it down, you got to replace it. Those streams have to be planted. We have to get those buffers in place. And from our perspective, at the state level, we're just kind of assuming, of course, we're checking, but we're coming out the gate assuming that our developers are going to do their afforestation, they're going to do their reforestation, their mitigation in the stream buffers first. Well, once again, we're going to check on that. Y'all should too if you're in that position, for sure. But I think calling it out here is really putting our streams first. It's really getting that value out of our forest. I think that's very important to all of our work in the state, but also just critical for the work that we're doing to help out the Chesapeake Bay. I'll get off my soapbox on that. Okay, so proposed forest conservation plans. There's quite a bit updates on that. And the big one is they need to provide notification to adjacent and abutting property owners. And just call out that, property across the street, or across any other public right of way is considered adjacent. So, the neighbor across the street needs to get notified. Certainly the neighbor that's right next to the property needs to get notified. How that happens, the legislators said, like, through whatever the local authority notice requirements are. So, like, whatever is applicable in the locality that the work is taking place, that's what you do. So the state's not going to set that, like, how you do this public notification for the localities. That we're assuming, and it is the case in, I think, most of the places, that you have a way you've been doing this. It may even be in law. Just do that. It's fine. Of course, we're going to have guidance on how we do it, how we think it should be done in our model ordinance, but we're not dictating, and the legislators did not dictate to us how that's going to be done on a statewide level. However, they did throw a few things at us, and that is, the next one is if 75% or more of an area that's in priority retention area is cleared, then on top of whatever else notification is given, there must be an opportunity for not just written but verbal comments to be given and taken in and documented. So yeah, if you're planning to do some work in priority areas, just be prepared to hear feedback, I guess. And then there's a provision that was added to allow for judicial review of an approved forest conservation plan, and I just want to reiterate that that is after the approval, there can still be a judicial review of it. That provision's been added. However, petitions for the review must be filed no later than 30 days after said approval. And there's a lot more on that in the bills. If that's of interest to you, ask a question now. If I can answer it, I will. That gets deep into the legalese, though, so you might be better off just reading it for yourself and shooting it to an actual lawyer. Local program specifics. There's a lot, for sure, but I think what's the topic front of mind for a lot of our localities, like, what if we can't make all these changes, right? What if we can't hit the mark for whatever reason? That worry is out there, and so I thought I'd spend some time and some slides outlining that for you. And the long and the short of the first statement is, if there's something that in the local program where we think, like, we're not expecting that program, based on what they've written, their ordinance changes to maintain the current level of forest cover, then we're of course supposed to reject those and give notification on what needs to be changed. We don't want that to happen, right? We want to work with our localities, get them all up in snuff. I don't want to send out any of those letters, but we do have to do that if it comes to that. So let's have it not come to that. So how are we going to determine that? So we're going to ask questions like, how does the program account for and allow usage of street trees? Street trees were featured pretty prominently in the legislation, and I'll recognize my bias, but it's near and dear to my heart. I think we should be putting our street trees to work. I think they do a lot of good. Yeah, they don't offer maybe as many benefits as a traditional forest would in a lot of respects, but they do worlds of good for public health and safety. So, like, yeah, let's get these street trees to work. And we're also going to look at, like, how the program utilizes the protection of existing offsite forests. What are the annual reports like from the jurisdictions? And then I put this last bullet point in there just to drive home the point, and also because it's in the legislation. Like, we can't look at the effects of prior projects in determining compliance. So, like, if that project came in and was approved before July 1st of 2024, we can't apply the new rules. They don't apply, right? And we can't use anything in those projects to say you're not in comply with the new rules. It should go without saying, but I figured I'd throw it out there because they did call it out specifically. More on local programs. So in the event that a local program is unable to increase their forest cover, they must at minimum maintain their forest cover measured every 4 years. Obviously, if they're not increasing it, they're not going to be meeting that new state policy, and we're going to want to work with them so that they can increase it. But if they fail to meet that new policy, they have to at least maintain. And then a point in time that I did not put on the milestones, but I thought was worth at least a mention in the slide, because if we have local program implementers here, they're probably curious about it if they don't already know. But on or before December 31st of 2028, we will provide written notice to local authorities if they need to modify any of their local programs. And I put a few bullet points here on like what is going to trigger that notification from us. And that is like the local authority failing to maintain or expand its forest cover over 2 consecutive 2-year periods. That one's in there. I think, once again, I was involved in the process. I can't speak to legislative intent, but I think it's in there just as a, hey, you need to stay on this like all the time, right? So we need to be assessing our forest cover every 4 years to meet our new state policy. So we need to be looking, in line with our biennial reviews every 2-year period. Is this happening in all of our local jurisdictions? But also if they failed to submit their annual reports. I spent a lot of my time last year trying to get these annual reports in. A lot of that was just figuring out the right contacts. I was a pretty new guy last year, so I don't want to dog on our local programs, but you need to submit your annual reports. And then, the final kind of time point milestone that I omitted from that slide was, come January 2029, we can rescind the approval of any local program, if they don't meet these requirements. Once again, I almost didn't even mention this, but I felt it was so important. Like, we don't want to do this. We don't want to hit that point. We don't think we're going to with any of our local programs. In fact, I mean, we're 4 years out from that. We have time to get compliant. Like, we're not trying to do that, and I just want to speak for my program to that point. But that deadline is out there. All right. Questions. This is the point where I will take questions from you. If you have questions that we don't get to, or if you have questions that come up after this, please use our relatively new email inbox, which is fca.dnr@maryland.gov. I'm in this inbox not as much as I would like to, but our regional reviewers are in this, at least weekly, if not daily. We've got a lot of eyes on this mailbox. It's going to get you a faster reply than my inbox is, quite frankly.
All right. Thank you very much, Dan. And perfect timing. We have 15 minutes remaining for questions, and we have questions in the queue. I have questions. I'm sure there will be more that come up. We will see what we are able to get to. We do have a couple of related questions on solar voltaic facilities. So is there a size threshold for those facilities? And do the policies related to solar voltaic facilities, do those apply only for whole site solar arrays, or does that include portions of a development that incorporates solar? Amy Gilder-Basadi is asking, deducting portions of roofs with solar canopies over parking lots, etc. She's wondering how to properly apply this.
Oh, Amy, you always ask me the best questions. I don't know the answer to the latter part of that. If a project has a solar component but isn't a solar photovoltaic facility project, would that be exempt? I think that's one that we're going to have to chew through and develop. As far as the size limitation, no. If the project triggers FCA, it triggers FCA. I think the crux of that question is like, is this categorized as a solar photovoltaic facility project or not? And that's one that we've kicked around a lot between my team and the legal department, and we haven't got a clear answer on. So I think that's water we're going to have to tread together.
Okay. We also have a couple of folks asking when the technical manual is going to be available for local municipalities, as well as developers and designers.
So any local program should have it already. It may not have gone to the right person. I did get some email bounce backs. I did get some people saying, hey, I'm not the right person, send it to this person. So if you're a local program, please reach out to your colleagues that are doing the reviews. If they don't have it, reach out to fca.dnr at maryland.gov, and we can get that into your hands. If we need to update our records, please let us know. We'll do that. Like if you should be the point of contact in your locality, but you're like, I didn't get that email, like please reach out. We'll get it to into your hands, and we want to do that as soon as possible because we wanted you guys to already have a good look at this. As far as the rest of the people, like I said, we want to give our localities a good bit of time with it, but towards the end of this month, we're going to be sharing it out to industry folks, and then, like I say, eventually later this spring, we'll put it on our website. Our website needs a bit of work.
All right. From Brandon Parsons, can you further define qualified conservation mitigation methods, trying to differentiate this mitigation method from typical mitigation methods, i.e. on-site planting, excuse me.
Yeah, I can. That is a huge part, for sure. So I don't want to eat up a ton of time for it. So I got a example written down here that I'll read real quick to kind of get it conceptually, and hopefully that answers the question. But in a nutshell, qualified conservation just means kind of two things. One, you've taken an existing forest and you've put it in long-term protection, but then you've also done something to enhance it, and that can look like tree planting, or it can look like exotic invasive removal to natural regeneration. It can look like deer exclusion for natural regeneration. It can look like a lot of things, but you've gone in there and you've done something. And I've conceptually, what you want to think about is like a retention bank versus a planted bank. So your retention bank is your qualified conservation, right? So you've taken some forest that already exists, you've done something good to help it grow, and then you've protected that area. Whereas your planted bank, you've actually gone out to a place where there's no trees currently, and there hasn't been for a long time, and you've planted new trees. And this could be, I mean, in the case of a bank, it's offsite, but you can do that on site, you can do that off site. The key aspect is you are planting a new forest where there isn't a current forest, and it is very impactful. So like if you're using a retention bank, if you're using qualified conservation, that's where your 50% of the mitigation for a particular project is the cap, right? But if you're planting, if you're planting on-site, off-site. If you're establishing a planted mitigation bank, then you get not only 100% of that area in credit, but you can fulfill 100% of an individual project's mitigation requirement through that. I hope that answered the question. It's very complex, but that's it in a nutshell.
Right, and we had another question on qualified conservation. So to clarify, so Jonathan Bowman was asking, trying to clarify your QC example, if 15 acres of reforestation is owed, would 30 acres of qualified conservation mitigation be accepted?
No. And this is where, like, I wish they would have used a ratio other than 50%. 49, don't care. Because I think where a lot of people get confused, and you may be getting tripped up here, is historically and currently and into the future, if you're going into an area and setting up qualified conservation as a mitigation technique, you're only getting half of that area in credit. So you have a 30-acre area, you preserve it, you enhance it, you get 15 acres of credit. So say you have a project that comes along, right? So you have this 30-acre area that in qualified conservation, it gives you 15 credits, 15 acres worth of credits. You have a project come along, it needs 10 acres of mitigation credits. It can only pull 5 from that bank. It has to get those other 5 acres of credits that project needs from somewhere else, even though that bank still has 10 more. Hope that clears that up.
All right. There was another question, I think, on a similar theme. I think as we are talking about increasing forest cover and not just slowing forest loss, an attendee asked, what is the plan for when the net gain approach starts to impact other facets of land use, such as agriculture, once reforestable land becomes scarce?
That is a great question, and I'm gonna pull the old cop out that's above my pay grade. But I'm not blind to it. Like eventually, you're gonna run out of room, right? You can't grow the forest forever. Eventually, you're gonna have 100% forest cover, and I mean, I don't speak for the state when I say this, but I don't think that's where we want to be, right? There needs to be built environment. There needs to be environments that aren't forest. Like, and I'm a forester saying that. Like, if we're successful, we're going to get to that point, and there's going to need to be a policy change. I don't know where that point is. I think there's probably going to be a robust discussion going on that here soon with our leadership retreat, as we are due to put out a new forest action plan. So I'm hoping that we're going to have a robust conversation along those lines in our upcoming meetings. I'm certainly going to be asking that question, but I don't think we have an answer.
Sure. And Tom Miner was specifically concerned about agricultural use. So for farmers, would tree removal for agricultural use still fall under FCA requirements?
So this is where I'm going to toe the line a little bit, and I'll apologize for that. We're going to really need to look at that case by case basis, but generally no. If there's no land use change and it's an allowable agricultural usage of that forest, you're probably exempt. Like there was a lot of reinforcement of that in this bill. There was already some protections here with this bill, and I'll just highlight like the tree farm. Like if you have a tree farm, there are some tree farms out there. I don't know if they're here in this state. I'm still kind of a new kid, but they're out there in other states where there is part of their plan to clear cut that and do a complete 100% harvest of those trees, but then they follow it up with planting. Like it's going to remain a forest forever. That exemption was called out, even though I honestly, in my opinion, I think it would have been allowable under old FCA. It was called out under this one. I think if you're utilizing your forest on agricultural land, this legislation change supports that.
Yeah, and I think sort of a question that I was wondering about that ties into some that are in the queue is of the land use designations versus land cover kind of question. So Mark was asking, what source are you using to measure baseline forest cover for each jurisdiction? And my related question to that would be if there is, say, forest cover loss due to disease or fire or other disturbance, but the land use change isn't being affected, is that incorporated into measurements of like a local municipality or local jurisdiction's forest cover retention requirements?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I have no idea. Once again, great question. It's been on my mind. The other question along those lines is like, what's our baseline, right? Because we have a lot of measurements out there, like the Chesapeake Bay program measures every 5 years. The MACOG, the Metro Council of Governments, they're glomming onto that 5 year. This 4 year measurement is a new one to us. How exactly we're going to do that is a relevant question. And we don't have an answer. That's one of the aspects of this that we are still figuring out. And when does that clock start, right? These are all active conversations that we're having. I think you bring up a great point of like, did we lose this forest cover because of a disease? We've seen that. We've seen that with elm. We've seen that with ash. We're going to see it again. I don't want to, but we're going to, right? How is that accounted for? And I think to whatever extent that we can, if we can answer that question with, well, if the area is going to come back in forest, we're going to count it as forest. We should, but that's my personal bias. That's where I'm going to be pushing. But yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so I think that answers Rob's question as to whether the state has a standard method proposed for each local jurisdiction to collect their yearly data.
Oh, yeah, we do. So,
Okay.
and we have. So we have the annual data. Well, as far as the annual FCA data goes, we have that. As far as forest cover data goes, no, and I just can't imagine us looking to put that burden on our local programs. Like we already are going to need to assess that at the state level. It's just intuitive to me that we're going to be assessing that at the local level. I guess we may not. And if localities want to, like by all means, go do it. Send us the data and tell us how you did it. We're open to suggestions.
All right, a few other threads here. So I'll note for our attendees that while we are approaching 2 o'clock, Dan has agreed to stay on a little bit late to continue answering questions. So if you are able to stay with us, we hope you will. If you do need to run, be sure to check out this recording once it becomes available on the Foundation website. So we do have a couple of questions around. There's 2 threads I could follow. I think I will start with questions around the definition of forest land. So an attendee asks, can you elaborate on the new definition of forest land and how it relates to the current definition of a forest, 10,000 square feet or greater area with 100 trees per acre with at least 50% at 2-inch DBH? And will it play into the worksheet or other calculations?
There are a lot of questions in that question, so I'll do my best to address all of them. As far as elaborating on the definition, no, I honestly don't know where it came from. Not that I disagree with it. Like I think it's a good enough definition to utilize. Like I don't take issue with it. As it affects calculations, I think the most meaningful impact is probably going to be on your FSD. So some areas that might have been considered a hedgerow by one calculation or another, with this definition might be considered or would be considered forest land, and thus you would have to put a sample plot in there. I think that's probably the biggest impact of the forest land definition. That and we didn't have a forest land definition before. We had, I think, forest, but not forest land. Did that address everything? Did I miss anything? I feel like I missed something.
I believe so.
Okay, cool.
But if anyone has a follow-up, please just go ahead and enter that in the chat and we'll do our best to address it. So Rachel Lightheart has a question. How will the regular updates to the priority urban forest map work with project review timelines? So what happens if the map changes in the middle of a project review?
Well, we're versioning the map. Those versions aren't going to be very frequent because we don't want it changing all the time, right? We haven't set that interval yet. We're still talking with some of the people that are doing the source data to figure out what's intuitive, but we're thinking annually, maybe as frequently as quarterly. So whatever version of that map applies at the time would apply. Hopefully you can get through a review in a quarter, he says, knowing that some of our reviews take years. But to your question is like, if it changes during the review, I think I would fall back on this is a map for guidance, and you need to field verify. And beyond that, I guess I do want to recognize that is a real case that is probably going to come up at one time or another, and we're just going to need to tackle that case by case. And I think intuitively, like if the application was applied to with one version of that map, then that seems like it should apply. That's just my opinion. And we're probably going to need to work some of that language in our ordinance, in our model ordinance update. And I think our local program should probably do the same. Just say, hey, the version of this map that exists at whatever time frame is intuitive to you.
And a follow-up question from Rachel, will you be releasing the methodology associated with the priority urban forest mapping?
It's in there.
Excellent.
Yeah, there's a whole front screen in the experience builder that tells you kind of how we came up with this. And then also links to, like, we've incorporated the forest interior dwelling species map. That's in there, as well as the other maps that we've linked to. We're also probably at some point going to develop a presentation around this, because once again, I'm biased, but I think it's some really good work that we put in here.
Okay, we have a question from Catherine on riparian buffers. She asks, given that riparian buffers often coincide with floodplains, whether FEMA designated or calculated, and considering that MDE requires a joint permit application for forest planting in these floodplains due to perceived impacts, is there any ongoing collaboration between the state and MDE to address this issue as a to address this issue, as joint permit applications are costly and timely, especially in a situation where forest planting in a floodplain is the only impact?
I mean, we have full disclosure, we have not been collaborating tightly with MDA on this update. Like, we have had conversations. I don't want to say that we've just left them out in the cold, but I'm also not sure of the conflict that's being highlighted here. So I don't want to speak out of turn. But I will put out there that, like, we want to make the process as easy as possible. I am a process driven person. So if there's road bumps, things we can smooth out in the process while still being compliant with FCA, that's definitely work I'm interested in. And that might warrant a follow-up email. So if you want to send that to me directly, I'd be happy to go over that and maybe have an offline conversation.
Okay, so now we'll have a couple of quick, I think, details and definitions questions. So from Thayer, are the priority retention areas the same as priority urban forests?
They can be. So technically, no. Priority retention areas are their own thing, and have been. Like, they've been defined, and that's not changing. If it's a priority retention area, if it was, it is and will be, whether or not it's a priority urban forest. What's being defined now are forest and urban areas that are priority for retention. Some of those are also going to fall under the old definition of priority retention areas. So it's an additive layer.
Great. And from LJ Kemper, has a buffer been specified for ephemeral streams? believe that was in there. Or is there not one?
Now, I mean, we have intermittent and perennial. I could make an argument that ephemeral or intermittent. I don't know if it'd go very far. I'm gonna say maybe leaning no on that.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I mean, none of the legislation called out ephemeral, and I think there's probably a stronger argument than mine that ephemeral are not intermittent, but I don't know. I feel like they are. I don't know.
We may
Good
see this
question.
play out eventually. Yeah, exactly. Has the adjacent or abutting property owner notification via certified mail replaced the FCP public notice requirement via newspapers, or do both requirements apply now?
That's a hard one to answer because of the language that said consistent with local requirements. So I'll cop out and say I'm speaking from the state's point of view and say no. Like, and I think that's probably the intent. Once again, I wasn't involved in the legislation, but I think that's the intent of the legislation, was to strengthen the public notification and say, like, you have to do something more than just put it in the paper to say that the adjacent and abutting property owners have been notified. I think there was an intentionality there, like you need to do something proactive to reach them, whether that's, you know, knocking on doors, hanging door knockers, or direct mailing, or something like that. I feel like, in my, once again, not legal interpretation of this, is you have to go above and beyond the paper notification. The paper notification does still apply, though, in any interpretation.
Great. We have a couple of lingering questions around forest land definition. So I think there's still some confusion around thresholds, with a couple of users asking about, you know, whether 10,000 square feet or a 3/4 acre stand are not considered to be forest land.
Sorry, one more time.
So we had two related questions, one asking whether 10,000 square feet is no longer a forest, and another saying, I'm still confused about the forest land definition. Does this mean that a 3/4 acre stand is not considered forest if it is cleared or retained?
Okay. So I get the confusion there, because the definition of forest is not going away. So you can, yeah, God, this is one of the things that has caused me gray hair. You can have a forest that's not forest land, which I know some of you are probably going crazy right now. I am, in my head, still going crazy making that statement. But yeah, forest definitions are outside of forest land definitions. We're at the state level still trying to square that circle with our local ordinance. It's a tough one. And yeah, I think that's an offline conversation of how we do this at the local level, because it's not like they repealed the definition of a forest. They just added forest land.
I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, and there's also a lot, like, if you want to dig into these pieces of legislation and look at where those are being referenced, there is some insight in there of, like, how they want this to be applied, if you're keen enough with legal documents.
Okay, I think there are some questions remaining on, you know, worksheet or other, like, publication availability to the public. So I think maybe as an umbrella for some of those questions, where is the best place for people to go to look things back over? Is it back to the original bills, or is there a publication that DNR is working on to assist, or the technical manual?
So I guess as we stand now, if you're not part of a local program, go back to the bills if you really want to. Otherwise, we're going to be doing a wide release here relatively soon. Unfortunately, probably just before y'all get busy with spring tree planting season. But you could also wait for the technical manual to come out and go through that. And then later on this spring, we'll have our model ordinance, which will give some guidance there. And then, yeah, this webinar is going to be online, so you can go back through it anytime. And then hopefully down the line, once we've gotten some of these big, hairy questions, some of which were asked today, figured out, I want to put out a new user's guide to FCA, which should be helpful to a lot of people, but I recognize that's a long ways down the road for some people who want answers right now. So like, if you're chomping at the bit after this webinar to get deeper into it, best place to go is the bills.
All right. I'm just scanning through to see if there's any other burning questions. One person was asking about issues related, what kinds of issues are you anticipating regarding data centers? But while you think about that, I will let folks know that we did have a recent webinar all about data centers and a lot of the complications that are coming up with, all of the environmental factors surrounding their development. So please do go back over to the foundation website, marylandforestryfoundation.org, go to the webinars page, and as you look through our previous entries, there's an hour-long discussion all about that topic. But if there's some kind of, broad scale, bird's eye view factors that you wanted to briefly address, I'll give you the chance to, Dan.
So, I mean, to be completely honest, like that is a left field question for me. So I did not catch that previous webinar. So I'm not sure what all the issues around data centers are. I mean, obviously they're very energy consuming and take up a lot of space, especially with all the cooling aspects. I mean, we're seeing transmission line projects come through for data centers, which is, obviously large scale projects. But I don't know all that much about them. I did recently find out that like those AI searches on your web browser, trying specifically not to mention brand names, that automatically pop up, they're apparently like data hogs. They use somewhere between 10 and 100 times the data of a regular internet browser search. So like maybe turn those off so you decrease demand. I don't know.
Okay, excellent. And in the minute or so we have remaining, I guess as a final question, with the urban forest map that came out, will there be separate regulations to manage these urban forest areas? And if so, how do we treat existing forest conservation plans in these areas that come back in for a revision?
So I don't know of any that are going to come out. And I don't believe that was the intent. I think this is, I think the intent, and this could just be my bias. So I want to recognize my bias. Like I'm an urban guy. That's how I built my career. I think the intent was to call out the importance of establishing and enhancing our urban forests and protecting them, because they do a lot of good work, especially on the public health and safety aspects of it, and just reducing heat island and fighting climate change. Like I think that was the intent. Once again, wasn't involved, but I don't foresee any regulations around these. I am looking on ways that we can utilize this map to do those things, to plant and enhance them. Like I'm looking to focus my program's efforts in these areas so that we can grow these urban forests and get them working for us.
Yeah, well, I think the importance of urban forests is a great place to end this discussion, but I'm sure there will be more in the future. So thank you, Dan, very much for a lengthy discussion, a really important discussion that I hope everyone found informative and useful. So hope to see folks again a month from now. The third Thursday of every month, we have discussions on policies affecting forests in and around Maryland. So please do join us then. Thank you again, Dan, and thank you, Gary, for lining up this great presentation. So thanks, everyone.